Okay.
Of course.
Quick introduction here. Florida Senate President Don Gaetz is a local resident of Niceville. At the November 10th, 2011 Northwest Florida delegation meeting, the senator seconded a motion authored by his son, Representative Matt Gaetz, opposing the Okaloosa Island beach restoration project. The resolution to oppose the project passed unanimously. The senator has continued coalition success in the state Senate as his landmark ethics reform legislation passed unanimously on the first day of the legislative session, March 5th, and was signed by the governor. So please join me in welcoming our Florida Senate President, Don Gaetz. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you've got the floor, and I'll pass these around.
Well, thank you very much. How are you? Why, this is like old home week. Good to see you. Do you live out here? Or are you just curiosity seeker?
Well, I have come to here about curiosity seeker.
Ah, okay.
I always like to hear you speak. You know that.
Be sure for the ice cream.
No, there's a little honesty. Well, thank you all. Well, thanks very much, Dr. White. Thanks for letting me come by. I appreciate the chance to chat with you and to hopefully engage you in some conversation about issues that are important to you. There are several people who are here now who were at a noon speech that I gave, so my apologies, because now they will have had to hear Don Gaetz twice in one day, which, Jerry, it's cruel and unusual punishment. We ought to give them some for free or anything.
They're getting ice cream.
They're getting ice cream. Okay, I have less concern now. So now you're telling me I'm standing between them and the ice cream? Okay, well, thank you very much. It's been good to be here. I appreciate the chance to be here this evening. I have to tell you that my son, Representative Matt Gaetz, is a popular and an occasional guest of the Sherrys and of the Condo Alliance, and he apologizes that he couldn't be here tonight. He had not as good a opportunity as I had. He had another obligation, but it was one that he couldn't miss. And so he said, well, Dad, why don't you go and try real hard to represent both of us. So if there's anything I say tonight that you don't like, it's Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz. I was telling the folks I chatted with at noon today that I won the redistricting lottery. As you know, after the census in 2010, then by the United States Constitution, we have to redistrict and reapportion congressional seats and Senate seats and all of that. And so we reapportioned in Florida and redistricted in 2012. And I won the lottery because I not only got to keep Okaloosa and Walton counties in my district and Bay County, but I picked up Jackson and Holmes and Washington counties. So now I get a chance to go to watermelon festivals and possum festivals and all kinds of fun things that we don't necessarily do here on the beach. But I was mentioning at noon today that I was in Bonifay the other night, and I was about ready to get out and speak. I was at the Washington County Farm Bureau meeting, and believe it or not, they had, Jerry, almost 300 people there. And they had the best banana pudding I've ever had, I think. And as I was getting ready to speak, a guy grabbed me as I was walking up to talk, and he said, I got to tell you something now. When you're up there in Washington, I got a bunch of stuff I want you to tell on Obama. I know you go to the White House for those meetings, so I want you to tell Obama he's ruining the country. And I said, well, sir, I think you have me confused. I'm not a Washington senator, I'm a Florida senator. And he looked at me like I was trying to mislead him. And he said, I thought there was only one kind. I said, no. I said, your luck has run out. There are two kinds. There are Washington senators and there are Florida senators. I'm just a Florida senator. And he said, well, I want you to go to Washington. I said, please, don't send me there. Anywhere in Washington. But some people get confused. And you can imagine now with this Syria vote that's coming up, and the Foreign Relations Committee this afternoon in Washington voted to approve the President's proposal to bomb Syria. I've gotten 100 emails today, Jerry, from people asking me how I'm going to vote on bombing Syria. So I want you all to know that the Florida Senate is not going to bomb Syria. It's not going to happen. But even though there are occasionally opportunities to confuse the issue, a lot of the same things that we deal with here in Florida, the federal government tries to deal with, and I must say candidly, and maybe with bias, I don't think they deal with them as well as we do here in Florida, like managing our budget and paying down our debt and other things like that. I was reading some Gallup poll information the other night. I don't usually read Gallup polls, but I did read this information, and I learned that that 10% of the American people now believe in the Congress of the United States. Their approval rating is at 10%. Muammar Gaddafi's approval rating was at 14% when they killed him. So all I can say is that I don't think Congress is doing too well. And then the same Gallup poll showed that 29% of the American people believe in Bigfoot, believe that Sasquatch is real. There are people nodding in this room. In other words, 3 times as many people believe in Bigfoot as believe in the Congress of the United States. If you think about it, that actually makes some sense. Well, there are a lot of things that people do in Congress that we don't quite understand, but there are differences between what they do in the Washington Senate and what we do in the Florida Senate. And just so you won't be confused, let me tell you a couple of differences. First of all, in Washington, they don't have a budget. For 6 fiscal years in a row, the Congress of the United States, the Senate of the United States, has been unable to pass a budget. They just live on continuing resolutions and have never been able to figure out in these last 6 years how to reconcile their checkbook. And in Florida, on the other hand, we have a budget. We have a constitutional requirement to balance our budget. As Jerry knows, he served in the House. We do balance our budget, and I think that's a lot better thing to do, to have a budget that's in balance, and a budget that we hold up to public scrutiny, and a budget that we work on in public and come to terms, than to simply operate without a budget as they do in Washington. Now there's another difference, and that is Washington senators don't have to worry about debt. They just borrow more money. They call the Bureau of Printing and Engraving and just say, turn the machines up and spew out more devalued $100 bills. We'll borrow the money from China. In Florida, by contrast, we probably do a lot of things poorly, and those things that we do poorly, probably it's my responsibility. I probably made the mistakes. But in Florida, instead of adding to our indebtedness, this state is actually paying down its debt. This past year, we paid down $3 billion in long-term debt in the state of Florida. We have the highest bond rating you can get because we're fiscally responsible, we balance our budget, and we pay our debts. And I think that's a pretty good thing. Now, there's another difference between Washington senators and Florida senators. And that difference is that in Washington, if you get elected to the Senate, it's like a lifetime thing. It's like being a federal judge. You can't get them out of there. Even after they die, they stay in office, I think, up there. In Florida, we have term limits. And so when Jerry finished his distinguished service in the House of Representatives, he came home. And in 3 years, when I'm finished in the Florida Senate, then I get promoted to the highest position in this state, the position of citizen. And I get to come home, and Vicki's got a long list for me, and I get to take my place in the citizenry and live with the consequences of the laws that I have passed. And I think that's the right thing to do. There are other differences between Washington senators and Florida senators. I'll mention one, and that is in Washington, they don't seem to have much respect for the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. They keep chipping away at it and watering it down. And here in Florida, along with other states of like mind, we've passed legislation that underscores the Second Amendment, that ensures we have the right of self-defense, and we're going to stand up for our stand your ground laws, and we're not going to water down the Second Amendment. And that's another difference between Washington and Tallahassee, between Washington and Florida. And you may applaud for that, absolutely. I could tell you wanted to. I could tell you wanted to. Now, there are things that we do poorly in Tallahassee, a lot of them. There are things that I think maybe we occasionally, once in a while, do well. One of the things that we do poorly is we pass too many bills. And I can tell you that as Senate President, one of my jobs is to make sure that bad bills don't pass. When I got elected to the Senate, nobody whose door I knocked on said, Don, what you need to do is go over there to Tallahassee and see if you can thicken up the law books and make the rule books even stronger and weightier. No one said that. No one said, if you'll just pass more bills into law, we'll reelect you. Instead, I heard the opposite. That is people saying, if there's a way you can thin it out, if there's a way that you can remove some burdens that government places on us, that'd be a good thing. And so we try to do that. This past year, we went from having 3,000 bills introduced before the Senate to having 2,000 bills introduced. Still a lot of bills. But Speaker Will Weatherford, if you've not met him, he's a wonderful, very dynamic young man. He's going to have a great future in this state. Speaker Weatherford and I said to our members, let's not have the wacko bills this year. Let's not have the bills that don't even have a chance of picking up any support. Let's just not introduce them. So we got it down from 3,000 to 2,000, but the really good news is that only about 200 of the 2,000 actually passed into law, because some of the 2,000 were really dumb ideas, really bad things, or they just weren't ready for prime time, or they needed to be, as we say, matured a little bit before we took them to the floor. And my job as Senate President is not just to, I get to tell them where their parking spaces are, Jerry. I get to tell them where their offices are. But most important, I have some influence over which bills actually get on the floor of the Senate. And I'll tell you about a couple that I think were bad bills, and I'm glad we stopped them. One was a bill that said, you know, we tax gasoline, and we tax a lot of other things. There were some people who wanted to tax services, but we hadn't figured out yet, but maybe we ought to tax water. So every year we get a bill, some well-meaning legislator sponsors a bill that says, the water you drink, the government needs to get a slice. You need to be taxed for every drink you take. That'll be a nickel. We stopped that bill. And then I'll tell you a story about, I happen to be a Republican, so let me pick on Republicans. But I won't tell you who, because I want to protect this senator from being destroyed. We had a senator who sponsored a bill that would have required, get this now, a tax on every live birth. Now try to wrap yourself around that a little bit. A tax only on live births. So the notion here behind that bill was that as you draw your first breath, the very first thing, Ben, that we would do is send the tax collector out to collect a tax from that brand new newborn baby. And the senator came to me and said, Don, well, actually didn't say Don over in Tallahassee, they call me Mr. President. Vicky says, Don, take out the cat box. But over there they call me Mr. President. So this senator said, Mr. President, why won't you call my bill up? My bill needs to be heard. We need a public hearing. I want the bill debated. I want a chance. And I said, Senator, I'm not going to call your bill up because I'm trying to save your life. If there's a public hearing on this bill and it's on television, you can't go home. You will have to leave the state of Florida and change your name because this is a dumb idea. And so I put the bill in my bottom desk drawer where there are a number of bills, and there it sits, and it won't see the light of day.
But there are a couple of bills that we passed that I think you would like. One, I'll brag on young Representative Gaetz. After trying and encountering tremendous resistance from very well-financed out-of-state lobbies, Representative Gaetz was successful this past year in passing legislation that once and for all ended the mandate to buy ethanol. So now we can buy gas without ethanol in it.
They just started selling it in Crestview last week.
Well, that's great.
Awesome.
And as you go up and down the highway now, you're starting to see signs that say ethanol-free gas. And so if you like that, you can thank Representative Gaetz. If you're addicted to ethanol and you love gumming up your motor with it, then you won't like Matt Gaetz. Another bill that we passed that I think you would be interested in is a bill which reversed a Supreme Court decision of a number of years ago. A number of years ago, the Supreme Court said to Democrat and Republican governors, you can hire an agency head. You can hire the secretary of an agency. That person serves at your pleasure. You can fire the person anytime you want. But once the individual becomes an agency head, she or he has the right to promulgate rules, and you don't have anything to say about it, Governor. They can promulgate rules that you hate, even though they serve as an employee at will at your pleasure. And so Governor Graham, a Democrat, Republican governors tried to get some kind of sanity built into this situation, and they failed. Well, there's only one bill that's ever become law in the state of Florida, sponsored by a father who was a senator and a son who was a representative, and that was legislation that we passed, which reversed that Supreme Court decision and gives the governor of Florida the authority and the responsibility to make sure that agency heads that she or he appoints promulgate rules that only the governor or the legislature can give prior approval or a statutory base to. So, what that means is that the gray-faced, pasty bureaucrat who sits in some office in Tallahassee where there are no windows and just thinks up rules and regulations, you can't reach that person. You can't reach out and touch them because they don't work for you. But I work for you, and Matt works for you, and Governor Scott works for you, and so therefore now you have a soul to damn and a body to kick. If there are rules that are in the way of promoting business, of adding jobs, of allowing families to operate in a way that's independent with their own property, as long as you don't bust anybody else's nose, now you know where you can go to get that fixed, and that is an elected official that you choose. And we can't hide and say, well, that was some agency head who promulgated that rule. Now they have to have a statutory basis, they have to have gubernatorial approval, or they can't do it. So we've already wiped off the books over 1,100 rules, and we've eliminated the independent authority of the bureaucracy to be an unelected fourth branch of government. I hope you like that. Now, I would just mention one other thing, and then I hope we can have some conversation. And that is that we do a lot of things, I'm sure, in Florida government that we could do better. And as I mentioned, if there are mistakes made, it's probably, if you do a dig down and try to find the origin of the mistake, it's probably me. But we're doing things differently and better, not only than Washington, but I think we compare well with the states that we compete against and the states that we're compared to. The state of Pennsylvania. Harrisburg is the capital. Harrisburg is now the first state capital to declare bankruptcy because they can't manage their money, apparently, very well in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. If you look, for example, at the state of New York, New York has just, you're nodding your head. Somebody told me the other day, I'm a refugee from tolls and taxes in New York. Well, in New York, they just passed a budget which the governor called a bare bones budget. Now, New York and Florida have about the same population. That's still a little few more than we do, but they lost 2 members of the House of Representatives. We picked up 2 because, remember, they're apportioned on population. And we're about same size. They just passed a bare bones budget of $141 billion. And they're sending their folks to Florida for us to take care of. We just passed a budget that meets the critical needs of the state, that's balanced, that lets us pay down our debt, give teachers a raise, give our state employees the first raise they've had in 6 years, and we did it for half the money. I think that's pretty good.
70% of their budget is social services.
Yeah. Social services will eat you alive. Jerry can talk about the growth of the Medicaid program, which, you know, the federal government sets the rules and we get the bill. Jerry can tell you about the growth of the Medicaid program during his service. I can tell you, I looked at the 3-year financial outlook for the state today, and it looks like now, if the federal government gets its way, that 52.3% of the budget of the state of Florida will be consumed by Health and Human Services. That's not because we make all those decisions. It's because those decisions, in a large sense, are forced on us by our masters in Washington. Look at the state of Illinois. That's where our president comes from. He was in the legislature there. He was a state senator there not too long ago. State of Illinois is having a legislative assembly right now. They got a problem. Their problem is that they raise taxes on job creators, and as a consequence, companies are leaving the state and jobs are leaving the state, and unemployment there is climbing. Florida and Texas, by the way, are leading the nation in private sector job growth. But they're escaping from Illinois. And so they came up with a solution in the Illinois legislature to raise taxes on businesses by 60% more. So that's why our governor is on the telephone every day calling people in Illinois, saying, come on down. I mean, the weather's great, the beaches are wonderful, we're a right-to-work state, we don't have any state income tax, and we're not going to tax job creators out of business. But they have one other issue in the Illinois legislature right now, and that is their pension fund. What happened is the state of Illinois and local governments in Illinois made promises to people and said, we will fund your pensions. Don't worry, we got you covered. But they didn't properly fund the pensions, and they made promises they didn't and couldn't keep, and so now they're in a crisis, and their pension system in the state of Illinois is now insolvent. And so consequently, they have 2 choices. They can either break their promises to the firefighters, the police, and the other people who devoted their careers to public service in that state, or they can raise taxes again and drive out more jobs and kill their tax base and their economy even more. By contrast, the state of Florida has a solvent pension system and that's because the legislature puts money into the pension system every year. We put in about $500 million this past year. That's money we take away from education and roads and economic development and other things in order to put it in the pension system. But when you make a promise to somebody who then bets their career on your promise, you got to keep your promise. So we have a solvent pension system. We're paying down our debt. We're managing our money in a way that balances our budget, and we're taking care of the critical needs of the state. Are we meeting every wish that everybody has? Absolutely not. But are we doing better than our competitors and the states we're compared with and our masters in Washington? I think we are. So the report from Tallahassee is, Dr. White, I don't know if he would give us an A. I don't know if he'd give us an A-, but I would argue that we'd get a better grade on the curve than the people that we're being compared with around the country. If we can keep doing that, and if you can stay involved in the issues that matter to you, then I think we'll wind up having better jobs and better communities and better schools and a better Florida. Thank you. Can we do questions?
Yeah, we've got 10 to 15 minutes for questions, so does anyone want to start?
Madam Mayor.
I would like to know, with the pension plans, is the state of Florida looking at changing the pension plan so that they can stay solvent? In other words, not as much as when they retire as it is now?
Well, Speaker Weatherford proposed, and I supported, an idea last session. It passed the House, did not pass the Senate. We fell 2 votes short, which would say to new employees, not existing employees of the state, but new employees coming in now, that they would be in what's called a contribution plan as opposed to a guaranteed benefits plan. So a contribution would be made by them and by the state of Florida, by the taxpayers, and that contribution would be toward their retirement fund, as opposed to a guaranteed benefit plan. Right now, here's what we say to retirees in Florida. We say, we will guarantee you a 6% growth on your assets. Is there any bank here that can guarantee 6%? Any savings and loan, any mutual fund?
0.60.
Yeah, 0.60 if you're lucky. And so what Speaker Weatherford tried to do was not take anything away from existing beneficiaries and existing employees or existing retirees, but to say to new employees coming aboard in the state, we want to make sure that we can keep our promises to you, so we'd like to change to a direct contribution plan and even give you a guarantee of 3%. But we don't know if we can give you a guarantee of 6%. And we fell 2 votes short in the Senate. My guess is that there will be another effort made on pension reform this next year. I don't know, Glenda, if it'll be exactly the same bill. But here's the real issue, and of course, as former mayor, you're well aware of this. There are there's an institute, a government institute at FSU, the Leroy Collins Institute, that did an analysis recently of Florida's pension system. And they found that the state pension system is solvent. But they found that two-thirds of the municipal pension plans in the state do not meet tests of solvency. And part of the reason for that is because there weren't any standard tests of solvency. And so this past year, what we did do is we passed legislation to require everybody who has a public pension plan, county, municipal, state, whoever, to maintain their pension plans according to national and accepted accounting standards of solvency, and to report how they stand to the people of their community, to taxpayers and to people who are depending on these pensions. So we did take that step. But I would suspect there will be a pension bill of some kind. I'm not sure exactly what the content will be. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Senator. The Florida budget for 2013 to 2014 is up 6% over the budget from 2012 to 2013. And also, almost 40% of the Florida budget is now being funded from federal sources, and that's been a trend over the last 5 years, which is going up 3-4% per year. I was just wondering how you're going to address these trends for the remaining 3 years in office.
Well, let me tell you that part of the reason why our budget went up this past year is because we put money into reserves. When you take money, when you budget money, you have to budget reserves as well, according to our accounting system. So the budget that I will vote on will include reserves. And right now I'm negotiating with the Speaker of the House as to what those reserves ought to be. I think they ought to be pretty high reserves, because if we hadn't had reserves in 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, if Governor Bush and Jerry Melvin hadn't socked money away at that time when they were in office, we wouldn't have been able to get through those years with any kind of financial health. So the first thing is that your budget goes up when you put money away in reserves. The second thing, and probably the most important thing, is Medicaid. Unfortunately, to oversimplify, under Medicaid, the feds set the rules and we get the bill. And so when eligibility standards change, and there are more people eligible for more Medicaid benefits, then our costs go up. Now, Medicaid is a shared state-federal program, and the amount that the state puts in varies based on a formula in Washington that oscillates back and forth between and among the states. But the fact is that as we're required to put more money into Medicaid, our budget goes up in an involuntary sort of fashion. The gentleman right behind you put his finger on what has happened in the state of New York, and in my response back to him, I mentioned that next year, not completely but largely because of federal requirements, our budget for Medicaid and for Health and Human Services generally will consume 52%, slightly over 52% of the state's budget. And as that number goes up, because of federal rules and federal requirements, not completely but largely, that drives our budget up. And then there's a third factor, and it's one that just drives me crazy. I was just on the telephone to the chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee that deals with criminal justice. Our Department of Corrections can't live within its budget. And part of the reason they can't live within their budget is because we have resistance to some of the budget cutting measures that the legislature would like to put in place, like privatizing the health services in the prison system. And so as a consequence, we're going to be carrying forward a significant deficit in the Department of Corrections that we carry forward each year that we have to fund in our budget because we have to pay our bills. So again, we have to take money from other sources, including your pocket, to pay for the Department of Corrections ongoing spending. So those are three factors that tend to drive our budget up almost in an automatic pilot sort of way. Other comments or questions?
We've got time for one more. Go ahead.
Yes, Dave.
First, I'll commend you on what you did to rein in state agencies, because I think a big problem we have is when the bureaucrats get out of control, not the elected officials.
Elected officials are bad enough. We're bad enough.
The exact problem you talk about with the agency. Another problem that we've had with an agency, and it's FDPR prevails. Now, I think they're still more out of control than they should be. But we took them to a hearing, and what most people don't realize is we took FDEP to a hearing, and they have certain presumptions that are correct that are hard to overcome. We overcame those, and we beat FDEP. But what we didn't realize, at least not until fairly along the process, you go through this whole process, and you haven't really had a hearing. Because if you beat FDEP, and we did, the secretary of FDEP has the right to toss the judge's ruling out and say, I'm going to ignore it, and I'm going to do what I want to do anyway. And that's what happened to us. So you have to go through all of that, and you haven't really had a hearing. Is there some way that the legislature could make the agency abide by the Department of Administrative Hearing ruling? Because if they don't have to, then there's not much point in having a hearing.
I'm not a lawyer, and my other habits are also improving. So I can't give any legal advice, but I can tell you this. You're talking here about two kinds of judges.
Right.
You're talking about a hearing officer in the Department of Administrative Hearings who hears challenges to rules or challenges to agency actions. Then over here, you have real judges that wear black robes and have offices in the courthouse. If a real judge who has an office in the courthouse and wears a black robe says, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Department, Madam Department Head, you will do this, then by gosh, they will do it unless you appeal to a higher court. No agency head has the right to say, no, we're not going to do what a circuit court judge tells us to. But the hearing officer in the Department of Administrative Hearings is basically like I don't want to say he's a mediator, but he's a decider of facts within the bureaucratic process. The way that you get a definitive ruling, and again, I'm not trying to practice law, The way you get a definitive ruling that an agency can't overturn is you go outside, you go to the courthouse, you go to a judge who's really a judge, and you get that kind of a ruling. But the Department of Administrative Hearings is really interpreting agency rules. So the answer to your question is no.
So you have to have a civil suit, is what you're saying, a
Well,
civil process.
Yeah, you have to have a civil process, but a hearing officer gives you an answer which then you have the right to take. Whoever loses has the right to go to the circuit court with.
Right, but we actually can't go, as citizens, we can't go to the circuit court until we've been through the whole administrative hearing
Right.
process. So you essentially have to have twice the expense because it is a full-blown hearing.
Yeah, you got it right. We have an Administrative Procedures Act in Florida, just like other states do. And if you want to take on an agency, you've got to go through the administrative hearing process before you can find your way into the circuit court most of the time. Absolutely. And repealing the Administrative Procedures Act probably is not going to happen.
Okay.
Any other comments? Yes, Jerry. I'll give you a chance
I'm gonna make it real
to
short
rebuttal.
Okay, Senator, I'm trying to work with a 94-year-old woman right now. She's from Fort Lauderdale. She bought a prepaid burial policy, and she's up here now and wanted to transfer it up. They refused to send her the interest that was built up in it. I'll be sending you all that information. We need a bill to correct that situation.
And the insurance company refused?
No, the prepaid
Burial company?
policy, yeah.
Now, and there are things like that that happen all the time, and people are always finding some way to rip off consumers. Let me just mention one other thing before I yield the floor, as we say in the Senate, and that is to thank the Sherrys for standing up. It's hard to stand up to any kind of government bureaucracy. It's hard for people even to get up sometimes, the expense and maybe even the courage to get in a car and drive to Tallahassee or go to a county government office and deal with somebody who's sitting across from, sitting in a big oak desk and has flags behind them. So I would tell you this: the Sherrys, no matter how you feel about specific issues, and I happen to have supported their issue, but no matter how you feel about specific issues, these are citizens in the finest tradition of this country who would not take no from the government for an answer. They had the courage, and they had the skill, and they had the time and determination to challenge what the government said, and as a consequence, won important victories for Okaloosa Island.
But with that, I wanted to thank the Senator for sharing his time with us tonight. And Senator, we have a small token for you. I'm sure he's probably getting to be very familiar of these. This is an Okaloosa Island beach collage. He's gotten several over the years here. We're doing pretty well with time, so I'll just read what it says. It says, "Dear Florida Senate President Gaetz, thank you for speaking at the Condo Lines of Okaloosa Island 5th Annual Free Ice Cream Social. Our members remain grateful to your action at the November 10th, 2011 Northwest Florida Legislative Delegation meeting, where you seconded the motion authored by Representative Gaetz opposing the Okaloosa Island Beach Restoration Project. We look forward to your support of an East Pass Sand Tracer study. A study will assist with responsible and productive management of the East Pass dredge sand bypassing without unintended consequences that may harm the quality of life and economy of Okaloosa Island and the city of Fort Walton Beach. Given the expense of inlet dredge and beach restoration events, a sand tracer study can pay for itself many times over. We value your steadfast defense of the beautiful sugar white sand beaches of Okaloosa Island. Sincerely, the Condo Alliance of Okaloosa
Thank you.
Island."
Thank you very much.